Get I promise we're starting right at 5 because we have a lot to get through, and we've heard from people from past meetings that we feel like there's not always enough time, which there's not, but we don't want to have 3-hour meetings. So we're just going to try to start right on time and do our best to give ourselves as much space as we can. So thanks everybody for being here on time and for being here on such a beautiful day. I know at least we have big windows to enjoy a little vitamin D. And hopefully we'll get out of here before the sun goes down. We should. We'll be out by 7. So, all right, this is advisory committee meeting number 3. This is our 3rd one, and we're about 8 months into the project. We've been up to a lot, which we'll get into a little bit. So our agenda for today is, did you all receive your emails with materials? Okay, awesome. Thank you. I know we're giving you some homework. We really appreciate you doing it. This is another thing that'll give us more time in the meeting so that we don't have to go over a lot of material. Right. Welcome. Okay, great. So everyone received their materials. So we're going to review those revised guiding principles that I sent. Then we're going to start talking about scenario planning. We're about to launch into the phase that we call imagining possibilities, which is where we do a lot of the scenario planning work. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background on it now, and the next time we come, which will likely be probably October or early November, we're going to dive even deeper into it and start, and we're going to be doing the scenario planning game and workshop. And then we're going to spend the bulk of tonight, about an hour, having a discussion about resilient strategies, which you all also should have gotten those materials. I will give you a few minutes to review them because it's just a lot of material. You might need to refresh your memory, even if you just looked at them. So we'll have a few minutes to review those, and then we're going to have about an hour to discuss those and the critical uncertainties. And I'll give you better instructions on that once the activity starts. Good. Questions? Okay, let's jump right into the guiding principles then. So I sent you a revised version of the guiding principles, and those have been revised based on the feedback we got from our 2nd meeting and sort of work sessions that we did with staff to make those revisions. So really the questions we have for you are, do these updated guiding principles accurately reflect the feedback that you gave? Is there anything you felt like you heard or you're saying that really isn't reflected in the guiding principles? Keeping in mind that these are high level, we're not trying to get into like nitty-gritty details. That'll come later, right? And then is anything missing or unclear? Okay, so those are the questions to keep in mind, and we kind of asked people to think about what comments they had ahead of time. We've got a board up here. And we do have, this is a hybrid meeting, by the way, so we have a couple folks online. I think we have 2 AC members online. And so we've got 4 AC members online, so we'll try to be mindful of them as well. And Sarah's moderating online. Sarah, let us know if you have any trouble hearing or seeing what's going on. So we've got a Miro board up with all of the guiding principles. This is the updated version. Obviously, they're pretty hard to see. But you all have a copy as well. And we're going to take notes. We have about 15 minutes for discussion. Does anyone want to open with any comments on any of these guiding principles? Are we going to go through one, or we're just gonna, any comments you have? I mean, we could go through and just ask, like, anyone have a comment on this one, this one, this one? Does that make sense?
I have no idea what these switches
did. Okay.
You're darn.
No. Yeah, we can go through them one by one. Why don't we do that? So our first one is lifelong well-being and family support. Any comments on this one? Anything missing? Anything not hitting us right?
Just one comment that I had is that strong schools seems pretty, I want to say generic as a term. Like, what does strong mean? Are we talking about well-funded schools, well-supported teaching staff? Seems like a little bit more targeted detail in terms of what would make a strong school. And I know these are high level, so it's a balance, right, between getting too far into the nitty-gritty, but it seems like a little bit more definition than makes sense. Huh?
comments on this one. I'll also note, that you're welcome to follow up with comments if things trickle in or new thoughts come after this discussion. And we have an open survey right now for the guiding principles. There's actually a flyer right here with the QR code for the survey. It has the full guiding principles on it with an opportunity for you to leave feedback on any. Obviously, this is a much more like personal way for you all to give us feedback, but that's another way to get feedback after this. Just want to put that out there. So I'm not hearing anything else on this guiding principles. Shall I move to the next? Yeah. All good on. Yeah, I think we just need to paraphrase what we're hearing because folks can't hear us. So if you want to just repeat what folks saying. Yeah. All right.
Oh, sorry, the question I had, the housing for all, young family seniors, people with lower moderate incomes all need affordable, appropriate, and desirable places to live. The word desirable was confusing to me. I don't remember where that came from in the conversation or what that meant.
My recollection of that is we have a lot of, part of the conversation that I was involved in was that we have a lot of, haphazard, places for folks to stay that aren't really, they're rented as a living space, but are,
Like substandard, I mean, we know that some of them are not safe places or but it's more like.
Hot plates and, rather than a kitchen, hot plates and, shared bathrooms, those kinds of things. So yes, substandard. That was part of the.
And desirable isn't a room with a view, it's a room with running water.
Amenities.
I mean, when I think of desirable, yeah, like there's housing that is honey buckets and.
And I'm just. So depending on who you are, what is desirable to you may be very different than those of us with the, a wherewithal to join a group such as this. And so, I think, there are many people who, a hot plate in a shared bathroom is a step up from their current living situations. And I guess, it's not, we're really very, this is just like, what does a nice community look like? That's the level we're at. None of this is really super specific to Juneau. I think everyone probably wants most of these things anywhere. But, I guess I get concerned, like, as this works its way into a more defined plan, that we don't do something up front that has the unintended consequence of making it more difficult to do something that is needed, even though it's not necessary. There's a lot of triage that's not pretty, but it needs to be done. And so, like, if there are some communities where they have, like, beauty standards for the housing that gets built. That would be a step backwards for Juneau. There's just so much need out there that we can't afford to be thinking at that level, at least in my opinion. So I guess I just get careful about being too adjective-y.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a pitfall that we have to be careful about with guiding principles, is we don't want to be so specific that we're limiting ourselves or not allowing ourselves to be flexible, but we also want enough specificity that it's clear and it's actually going to be actionable. I think there's two pieces of this thing desirable. So and desirable maybe is not totally appropriate for this first thing, but the first thing I'm hearing is it needs to be safe and functional. And then it also needs to be appropriate, meaning it needs to be something that meets someone's needs. And in some cases that could be an SRO, meaning like a single room with a shared bathroom and kitchen, because you just need something affordable. Maybe you're a single person, you know, that,
Transitional housing, I mean,
Sure,
go
yeah.
talk to St. Benny's and what they need is
Right.
that.
right,
Yeah.
and you know, that may not be their ideal dream, but that's that is safe housing that is appropriate enough for what they need. And you know, others might really need a big house because they have a large family or they have that preference. Other people maybe are recently retired or disabled and maybe need something a little smaller with less care. So I think there's a level of like, what's appropriate and do we have enough options for all the people in our community who have a variety of different needs and preferences? And then just a baseline of it has to be safe and functional housing, right? So I think we'll work on wordsmithing that, but thank you for all that. Anything else on housing for all before we move on to economy?
One word that I might throw out there is adequate. We hear that in a housing policy basis sometimes. It's very similar to appropriate. So it's kind of what you're talking about, especially in terms of amount of housing. That
Okay, great. All right, let's move on to resilient. Oh, yes, I'm sorry, go ahead.
My name is Logan. Where are the name tags?
They are right on the table over there.
Sorry, I wasn't
Yeah.
awake.
That's okay.
I guess that first sentence, like, needs more housing, kind of sticks out to me a little bit because just, I know there's a lot of push towards like building more housing. And I think it's also important that we make more of the housing that we have accessible. And I just wonder if that phrase, like with the Airbnbs and things like that, I think people are pretty aware of those issues, but like there's a lot of housing in Juneau that could be made more accessible to people that live here, but it's not. So
Yeah, so the comment, just for the folks online who are having trouble hearing, is that saying we need more housing is implying that we just need to build and build and build, and that will solve housing problems. But there's also kind of this piece of the housing we have needs to be, you know, like, we need to make the best of what we have as well, I guess, is kind of what you're saying. And use what we have to its fullest. Am I capturing? I feel like there's a piece of what you said I'm maybe missing.
yeah, maybe just the word like accessible or.
Accessible. Yeah, so it's not just about housing production, it's also about other things. Yeah, policy that supports affordable housing.
I just want to put out, I don't know that accessible is necessarily the best word in that instance, since that typically means ADA compliant. It's got a lot of specific meanings behind it. I get what you're going for, but that may not be the right.
Available, maybe?
Attainable. Attainable. I think we had attainable in here and
We removed it.
might have taken it out, so we'll have to continue thinking about that. Okay,
Although
so
that said, the general accessibility of Juneau is kind of.
also could probably,
Yeah.
yeah, it would be helpful to be in there. All right, let's
There's a point raised about just the accessibility of Juneau as a whole, just for folks online.
Okay, so resilient year-round local economy. Do we have any comments on any changes, updates that have happened in this one?
And for me, reading sort of the last sentence there, improving infrastructure such as the ferry system, broadband internet, and the local food system, for me, what I've heard a lot about is shipping options that plays into a lot of the
Great.
problems for businesses, for building construction, for the cost of living, and so having more competitive ways of shipping large goods into town. That's a big constraint. A lot of issues.
Yeah. So for the folks online, the comment was that having better shipping infrastructure can really support local businesses.
We can hear people that speak up, so just speak up and then we can save a little time paraphrasing.
Thank you.
The broadband part, CBJ did that project and free Wi-Fi for, is it just for summer? I can't remember now, but that does help a lot with all of our issues, people downloading things for free. So is that, what do we mean by broadband internet?
Yeah,
It's
like
pretty
fast
much
internet.
fast internet.
Yeah, and reliable. as well,
Reliable, more, yeah,
Remote work and
yeah.
general connectivity.
For me, under this, employee retention is so huge, like it's so expensive to get someone up here, trained, and then all of a sudden. They can't find childcare or what, like you've invested this much, so and that's kind of in there, but. It retains young people as mentioned, but employee retention, especially for city, state. Jobs and all the way around, but
So maybe retains young people and the workforce or a year-round workforce.
And that really also includes recruitment. I had a conversation, we had a conversation at the hospital board that we have lost a handful of professionals that we've tried to recruit. They've accepted the job, they got all the way to, we're moving up here, and they could not find housing. So they declined the job. So
Yeah, we hear about a lot.
recruiting professionals that are willing to move to Juneau and find a place that's appropriate for them and their families and their dogs is a big barrier
Yeah.
for, I mean, not just the hospital, but I know it's citywide.
the school district has 90 openings. I mean, like that seems significant.
And this, I mean, this all ties directly into housing, right? Like
Yeah.
it's really a housing issue. I think.
Housing and childcare are the, I guess, for the,
And that is
Culture.
covered in housing for all to some extent, but we can try to tie that into economy as well.
I guess I would just be curious what other people think, but like, does everyone believe that that to remain economically viable, Juneau must continue to grow? I guess I don't know if that's necessarily true. That's kind of like one economic assumption, but I think there's a lot of ways to have a sustainable, resilient economy.
I would think if the population that is here now, that is aging, stays and aims to stay in Juneau, that yes, there would need to be growth enough to be able to provide the essential services at the rate that's required to be able to facilitate those folks staying at the very least.
I'd say that, just piggyback on the demographic thing, even, so we have a population that is aging out and retiring. If we don't grow the younger population to at least, kind of match that, it's challenging to grow the younger population. All these people came here because of a big economic boom, which was, state government and all that hiring. And so it's really hard to tread water. I think our options are shrink or grow. I would not have much faith in our local politicians managing level city population and economic environment. But one thing I wanted to say just on the year-round jobs, I would personally say year-round job opportunities. And I'm just going to give a little example here, but as the tourism season got longer and longer, I started to meet people here that had made the choice to overwinter in Juneau. And sometimes they were a barista, they were a yoga instructor or whatever. And I'd ask them, what made you decide to stay this year? Because they had been past seasonal employees, and they said, well, we made enough money in the season. We think we're going to stick it out and give it a try. And then I've watched, policy be on constricting the length of the tourism season. So it's one of those things where we actually have an opportunity to, make it easier for these seasonal employees to become full-time community members. I certainly like the people I met that were doing this. They have the adventurous spirit that I like these people, but, it is a kind of political question where, we've gone against that and kind of said, we don't want this, but, that is one way to turn seasonal jobs into more year-round stuff, is to lengthen that season.
And we're going to be talking a lot about more specific policies. What we're talking about right now, and in fact, today we are going to, and I want to save time for that.
Sure.
So I just want to kind of refocus us on these are like real high level guiding principles, right? So we're kind of at a point where we want to make sure that we're just not missing big themes, and then we're going to dive into some of what you're talking about. In fact, tourism and that kind of piece is gonna be a big part of what we're gonna talk about later today.
When I read the heading of this, number 3, resilient year-round economy, it makes me think about Juneau's seasonal economy related to the legislative session and then tourism. So just not calling out those 2 specific seasonal things within this sort of makes me think a lot of people reading this plan later will wonder why they aren't mentioned as within each guiding principles. And I don't remember discussing that with our groups, but maybe it's worth including within these that
That.
we have a
government
strong
and tourism are
legislative
pretty-
session economy. We have a strong summer 5-month tourism economy.
Right.
What can we do to improve the shoulder seasons? You know?
Yeah.
And maybe to the point around growth, because I hear maybe the hesitation of like, I think so many of us are here in Juneau because we love the connection to the outdoors and kind of the small town spirit that comes with that. So maybe prefacing it with sustainable growth, recognizing that there needs to be some demographic shift to be able to support a, healthy, sustainable aging process for the population that's already here, but not wanting a large influx or large demographic change or large shift in kind of the land that's being developed. According to.
Yeah, I'm gonna move us along because we are running behind, so I'm sorry.
Thank you, Lydia. with
Yeah.
this, the time police today. Okay, environmental, and remember also we can, we have opportunities to leave comments via email, if anything else comes up. So environmental protection and climate leadership.
I have a comment, and it's related to the last sentence there. It says achieving greater energy independence, especially through expanded hydropower, is critical to a resilient future. I would say that calling out, especially through expanded hydropower, is way too narrow. And is only, one part. There's a lot of additional hydropower that can be developed out there. I guess my suggestion would be to replace that with by fostering a cost-effective local clean energy system. And the reason being is, if the reason hydropower is such a great resource is that it's cost-effective, right? And when people are making the shift to electric vehicles and they're making the shift to heat pumps and those sorts of things because it's economic. So we're trying to make sure that we are fostering a local clean energy economy goes a little bit beyond just adding more hydro. It's taking care of what we have now, looking at energy efficiency. So that would be my suggestion.
Just to expand on that, I think that like one way to think about, CBJ's potential ways to influence that is to think about, maybe a tighter phrase, it's like beneficial electrification. So there's Southeast Conference's economic development strategy, right? Like basically what can CBJ do to encourage the beneficial electrification? There's a lot of things there. But that beneficial, the affordability, right, for people and also the predictability and things, EVs and e-bikes, versus other types of energy use.
I guess suggest adding, so it says allowing responsible use of natural resources, and then it has fishing, mining, and tourism, potentially adding recreation, because even without tourism, recreation would still have an economy here. People in Juneau are still gonna wreck kayaks or ride bikes, things like that.
All right, let's move on to connected community and neighborhoods. Any comments on this? Then culture and community again.
Maybe just a positive comment. I felt like you guys made some really nice changes on this and it feels like a little bit more cohesive, reflecting on some of the thoughts from folks. So yeah, appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, seeing no more comments on those two. Any final comments? I know that we went through that quickly, but I want to make sure we have enough time for the larger discussion. It's going to get into some more detailed policy. Yeah.
I wonder if some of the comments about aging demographics could be incorporated into guiding principle number 1.
I was
And
thinking that too.
And maybe some of the employee recruitment and retention housing issues could be incorporated in guiding principle number 2.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of overlap there. So I think when we're considering those comments, you all, I think 1, 2, and 3, those top 3 have a lot of overlap and a lot of connection. And so we'll think about how can we, hopefully balance the 3, housing for all is very long right now, may get longer. So, we'll try to, that is certainly very central to a lot of Juneau's issues, as we know. But we also, it's very tied to like family support, lifelong well-being, retaining employees, the economy. So, we may we'll make sure everything is in here somewhere, and hopefully in the appropriate category.
And sorry, these are ranked?
No.
1 through 6, okay.
No, it's just a number
Yeah.
that's assigned to them, so we can, I don't even think we'll put a number to them, but I was just calling them 1, 2, 3, so I don't have to read the titles.
Gotcha.
Yeah, no ranking. There's not like a priority. Right. Well, let's move on. Thanks for that second round of comments. Again, feel free to email us. The survey will be open through the end of September. So over a month, encourage your family and friends to do that as well. And you all are welcome to fill that out if you have anything additional that comes up. Okay, so let's talk about scenario planning. So we've kind of alluded to scenario planning. We've talked about it. We've looked at the project schedule, but we haven't really gotten into detail about what it is or how the approach works. So scenario planning is a tool that we use for long-range planning, like comprehensive plans. And the reason that we use it is because we want to be able to test our policies that we put forward against a lot of potential future uncertainty, because we know that the future is uncertain. We could go to the next slide. So a traditional long-range planning approach assumes that past trends are just going to continue. We think, okay, we know what's happened in the past, and that's what's going to continue happening in the future. So it's a linear assumption, right? And that misses emerging trends and things that are uncertain, that we can't predict. And it reduces the useful life of a plan, because a plan can kind of, if a plan isn't accounting for things that are unexpected or uncertain, then when and if those things occur, it's not addressing them adequately. So that puts communities in a disadvantaged position in the future. With the scenario planning approach, it helps us make a plan that's responsive to a whole variety of future conditions. In this graphic, we're using the term macro forces, but you all, in our first meeting, we talked about drivers of change, which, if you'll remember, are kind of emerging issues or trends that are happening that could have a big impact in the future. Sometimes we can predict them, or they're fairly predictable. Other times they're very unpredictable. Things like recessions, political shifts, economic shifts, social unrest, infectious disease. And so instead of having a linear approach where we assume everything's going to be the same, we have this kind of approach where we look at a lot of potential future uncertainties or threats. We start with driving forces, and we use those to test the policies that we're going to put forward in the comprehensive plan. So why include scenario planning in a comp plan process? Well, it raises awareness of these emerging trends that may impact the community. It minimizes blind spots in the plan, and increases its useful life. It focuses the discussion on policies that will help the community to manage risk. So, it allows us to kind of do a better job of planning for things that could potentially happen. And so having sort of that buffer of that plan if those eventualities occur. And then it also provides a reference case for what could happen if policies stay as they are. So it kind of allows us to look at what happens if we just do business as usual and don't change things. And then what if we actually try new things? So it allows us to kind of play with and test different policies.
Yeah, I have a question about this. It's sort of about this, but the process in general. So some of the things that we're talking about are going to involve a culture shift of in this community, the folks that have really wanted Juneau to stay the same and nothing to change. And but can be educated about what we're trying to accomplish. Is that part, is the comprehensive plan process included, does it include assisting the community as a whole to make that slow or faster culture shift that's going to be necessary to sustain ourselves?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the things I really like about scenario planning is it is an educational tool, and it's a way to put everyday people in the position, in the seat of a planner, and help them to understand the like trade-offs that we grapple with. Because it's like, you know, if everyone agreed on the way we should move forward, the way we should grow, the things we should invest in, then planners might not even need to exist, right? What we grapple with a lot is many different priorities, many different points of view, and needs, and we kind of have to find some place where we can have enough consensus, or, you know, the least amount of harm done, so that like the best balance we can between all these kind of different needs. And that's something that scenario planning kind of allows us to think through. So we'll talk about this a little bit today and a little bit more next time. But what we're doing with scenario planning ultimately is creating ways to explore different ways to grow. So we have a business as usual scenario. This is when we get into the actual land use scenarios. Business as usual is just like, this is how we're already doing things. This is what happens if we don't change anything. And then we have 3 alternative scenarios, which are ways that we could grow, ways that we could do land use, that are all very different. You know, maybe one looks at if we really concentrated growth on Douglas, or one is maybe we really focus growth in downtown to support more tourism and the ports downtown. Maybe one is looking at having dispersed kind of centers around Juneau. You know, I'm just throwing some things out there, but we have different ways of looking at these different ways of growing. And we actually have metrics that we can produce from the modeling that'll tell us how they perform in things like transportation access, water consumption, land consumption, public health, vehicle emissions. And so we can kind of look at how each of these, we can look at where these growth things would happen on a map and think about that and think about if that matches our values. Then we can also look at how it actually stacks up in terms of performing in things that are important to us, like energy consumption, water consumption, public health. So it's a way of, you know, maybe I really don't want to see Douglas Island grow at all. I don't want to see any development out there. But maybe in that scenario, you know, housing becomes more affordable because it unlocks more space for housing. I mean, I'm just very hypothetical. Or, you know, I really feel like downtown shouldn't grow. Anyway, like there's different ways to evaluate scenarios that kind of take you out of a fixed position about how you think things could be, because we're looking at those metrics that evaluate them and we're grappling with trade-offs. And ultimately the public actually gets to weigh in on which of those scenarios. And yeah, so how does the public participate? This next slide. So the public explores trade-offs for how different scenarios perform against critical uncertainties. And then ultimately they actually get to vote on the scenario that they prefer based on the report card for each scenario. So looking at metrics and asking ourselves, do they meet the values that we've stated for our community?
I would also, I appreciate that, and it will go a long way, but I would also somehow, if not through this process, through ongoing communications from CBJ, once we've selected a scenario, continue the education process for the community that didn't choose to weigh in on and vote. So we don't have the loggerheads between current property owners or residents and the city and borough who is implementing what the majority of those who voted selected.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that comment. So let's talk about, yes.
I have an additional question about that. How does like that modeling framework incorporate like the additional uncertainty of like human action? So this is like guiding CBJ action. Like there's a lot of property owners that, or there's like not necessarily all of the space would be guided by CBJ policy. So how does that uncertainty get incorporated into like the output of that?
You mean the uncertainty of like, for
Human
example, what
action.
like a private property owner would do? I mean, you know, there's certain things, so we'll talk about this when we get to the critical uncertainties, but there are certain things that are out of the control of the internal, like, the public sector.
Right.
And we cannot control what Gold Belt does with their property. I mean, you know, there are levers we can pull to maybe have some control, but there are, you know, there's Alaska Native settlement land that the city does not own or have control over. There's a lot of private land that the city, but we do, I mean, the ultimate product of the comp plan is a land use map, and land use does inform zoning code updates, which is our development code, and that you know, that regulates how we use land in different ways. And so in that sense, we're kind of directly impacting that.
I think I kind of meant more so in exploring the different scenarios. So you said if we like are identifying these driving factors, then we're exploring the different potential scenarios and we get output from like a modeling framework. But we can't incorporate all of these different landowners and priorities. And so like, how do we know that the output is actually somewhat reflective of what these policies are?
We actually can,
Okay.
yeah, so in the modeling software, it's parcel based. So like we can control or, you know, change or, you know, say like, we know this parcel is set to develop. And so this is, you know, like that can be an assumption in the modeling process. If we know for sure that something's gonna happen or that it's likely to happen, we can test it if we can look at if it's not gonna develop versus if it is. So that's all something that we can customize. Yeah. And I know there's a lot of technical pieces that, if we had 5 hours, I could walk you through and it'd make a lot more sense, but hopefully that at least, kind of clears things up enough that we can, get like this is all gonna hopefully start to kind of come into focus a little bit. So this is just a diagram that's showing the 5 steps of scenario planning. And we're not going to talk about all 5 of them today, but we're going to talk about a couple that are going to get us to the point where we're going to start talking about the resilient strategies. The first step of scenario planning is to develop the drivers of change, which if you all remember, we did in our very first meeting. So if we could go to the next slide. Thanks. Actually, we know what drivers of change are, right? They're like emerging trends that could potentially really significantly influence the future. We developed a set of drivers of change by talking to over 25 local subject matter experts in interviews, and then also with you all in that first meeting that we had. And then through those interviews and our meeting with you, we developed 10 top drivers of change. So this came kind of directly from the work that you were a part of, and these are the top 10 drivers of change. State fiscal stability and revenue sources, population and migration trends, housing affordability and development capacity, climate change and environmental hazards, healthcare access and aging population needs, workforce recruitment and retention, tourism and its spillover effects, transportation and infrastructure vulnerabilities, federal and state political decisions, and the changing viability of traditional industries. So all 10 of those drivers of change will be, you know, part of our comprehensive plan process. They will be things that we consider as we're developing our policies and goals. For the land use scenarios that we're creating, what we want to get to is 3 critical uncertainties that have been developed from these 10 drivers of change. And so the critical uncertainties are used to test and evaluate the policies, the potential policies that we would put forward for scenario planning testing. So these are like land use or development policies specifically. And we use the critical uncertainties to test how a given strategy performs across a range of different potential or plausible futures, which are the critical uncertainties. So critical uncertainties are external forces, which means they originate from outside of an organization. So that means they're not things that the city has direct control over or can influence or change. They necessitate adaptation and transformation, and they're variables with the greatest potential impact, and their outcomes are unknown. So the critical uncertainties that we chose for Juneau for this scenario planning, the scenario land use scenarios are tourism and its spillover effects, climate change and environmental hazards, and federal and state funding and policy decisions. And that last one's actually a combination of 3 drivers of change, which were the transportation and infrastructure vulnerabilities, federal and state policy decisions, and state fiscal stability and revenue sources. We felt like those 3 were very connected and all very important. And so we combined them into one. So the step after defining our critical uncertainties or choosing our critical uncertainties is to actually test strategies. So resilient strategies are policies or actions that are designed to perform well against the range of our critical uncertainties. So resilient strategies are designed, again, to respond well, but ideally to more than one critical uncertainty. And, you know, not just one predicted outcome. So with that, I'm hoping that we can move into the actual description of the critical uncertainties and get you a little break before we start the activity. But are there any questions before we do that? Okay. I know this is a lot of information. You're probably absorbing a lot. So I'm going to read a little description of each of the critical uncertainties, and then we're going to take a break where I'm going to pass out the cards with the 15 strategies, which hopefully you all have already seen from your email, but we're going to take maybe 5 to 7 minutes to read those. And if you need to get up, stretch, get some water, you can do that too. And then we're going to talk about which of these strategies we think would be beneficial or effective in each critical uncertainty. Okay, so let's read the 3 critical uncertainties, and I want you to have these in your mind when we're looking at these strategies, thinking about how these strategies would work under these critical uncertainties. So the first is tourism and its spillover effects. It remains uncertain whether the city can successfully manage the negative impacts of its cruise ship industry, like downtown congestion and strained infrastructure, while avoiding the decline of the local economy. The city is highly dependent on tourism, and a reduction in visitors due to either new regulations or an unforeseen event would have major ripple effects. And this begs the question, can tourism be managed effectively to protect Juneau's residents' quality of life and its natural environment without compromising the businesses and jobs that rely on a steady flow of tourists? And the second critical uncertainty is about climate change and environmental hazards. So it's uncertain whether the increasing risk of natural disasters like landslides, floods, and extreme weather events can be effectively managed. CBJ faces a difficult challenge in protecting its residents and infrastructure as long-term ecological shifts, such as changing snowpack and unpredictable salmon populations, create new and uncertain threats. And this raises a question, how will Juneau plan for safety and adapt its key industries to a rapidly changing and less predictable environment? And then finally, federal and state funding and policy decisions. So uncertainty with state and federal funding and policy decisions creates instability, impacting funding and support for essential infrastructure like roads and bridges, and transportation services like the ferry system, as well as emergency management. This exacerbates issues with Juneau's existing infrastructure, which is aging and vulnerable to natural hazards. So this begs the question, will state and federal funding and policy decisions largely beyond local control effectively address Juneau's needs? Or will the community face ongoing challenges due to limited influence? Okay. So let's keep those three critical uncertainties in mind. We're gonna take a break, maybe like a 7-minute break. And then you can stretch your legs, get a little water if you need to, but I'd also like you, and if you've already reviewed these 15 strategies and you feel like you know them forwards and backwards, you can take the whole 7 minutes, do whatever you want. Lydia, can you? Oh, go ahead, I can do it then. So I'm gonna pass, this is a stack of the 15 strategies, and if you have any new strategies that you think of, that aren't on here, we've got a blank strategy card. You're welcome to write on these or take notes. Go one for everyone and two. Did you?
Okay, I was like, I didn't get this.
Yeah.
Yeah, we. That's their strategy.
I think none of
We
this.
haven't seen it.
No, there's.
Yeah, I got email one and then it said emails would follow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know, I got it.
I got it.
Yeah.
Reaction. Did we all?
Maybe I went to spam.
I hope that.
Oh, got it now.
In the comment section.
Okay.
So for online folks, we will be emailing you the list of resilient strategies. And you can take maybe 5 to 7 minutes to go ahead and review that. There's a sheet there with all the strategies on it. It should be the 3rd page. And so we're going to review those and then go over them together.
Thank you.
So keep an eye out for that in your inbox.
Thank you.
All right, online folks, hopefully you can hear us. We're just wrapping up our little study session here in about 2 minutes. So get ready to come back and we're gonna jump into the conversation. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and get started with the discussion, and I just want to let folks online know that you can raise your hand or unmute if you have a comment. We haven't had any online folks take the opportunity to comment yet, but you're welcome to do so, and we'll try to keep an eye on you all as we're having this conversation. Okay. So we're going to use an online whiteboard called Miro to go through the strategies and talk about for each critical uncertainty, which of the strategies we think could perform well or work well for that strategy or for that critical uncertainty. And just to be clear, these strategies we can say one strategy could work for all 3 critical uncertainties. In fact, that's kind of what we're hoping to identify as strategies that might work well across all 3. So don't feel like you have to choose one for each strategy, or I'm sorry, for each critical uncertainty. So we're actually going to use a voting tool to just get like an initial temperature check of what people, which strategies people think would work well for each critical uncertainty. And we're going to start with.
Can I ask you a quick clarifying question? Like when you say work well, do you mean like actually, like some of these strategies I see as like they would be nice, but highly unlikely to actually be achieved? And then there's some of these that are like within the locus of control of municipal government. And so like I'm wondering, like, from what perspective should I just be aspirational and not think about feasibility here, or what are you looking for feedback wise?
What we're looking for, I mean, yes, to some extent feasibility. So if your comment just generally is like this strategy, no matter what the critical uncertainty we're considering is, just this strategy does not seem feasible. I think that's a good thing to.
Yeah, and I mean, it's like, I guess it's just, I watch the city and them dealing with political day-to-day issues, and it's like some of these things, like, what's going, some of these things are like highly aspirational and nice, and you ask everyone and they will all say that they want them, but they never seem to make it up to the top of the priority list. And so
I think if it's just that, like, it seems aspirational, it hasn't been done yet. Then let's keep it on the list for now. And we can work through whether or not it's ever going to happen later.
Absolutely.
But if it really seems like this just couldn't be implemented or is not feasible for XYZ reason and is therefore kind of should be taken off the table or maybe like seriously downgraded because it just would be so difficult to achieve, that I think that's a good comment and that we should consider that. What we're also though trying to zero in on, so you asked like, what do we mean by successful, like, or which one of these would work well? What we mean is like, would these be able to respond to a critical uncertainty? So let's take tourism as an example, tourism and its spillover effects. So tourism is in its spillover effect right now. The conversation is about tourism is growing, right? And like, how do we manage that? And we're thinking about those types of policies. But tourism may not always be growing here, and that is an uncertainty, right? It could decline. And even if that seems unrealistic now, it's possible. And so we want to think about whether tourism continues to grow, whether it really grows faster than we thought, or whether it starts declining. Which of these strategies might like succeed or work well, either to address it or just in general. There's something that wouldn't not work well in the face of the impacts of tourism. So let's start here, and we're going to do a voting exercise that Lydia is going to tee up. So hopefully the folks online can see this as well as everyone else. Have folks done Mentimeter before? We're going to probably need phones for this. If you don't have a phone, you have a laptop, there's a URL. And if you don't have any kind of digital device, let us know and we can help you. We can vote for you. So if anyone has trouble voting. Yes, so we're going to start our first poll, which is in the face of the impacts of tourism or tourism and its spillover effects, which of these 15 strategies do you think would help Juneau respond successfully?
Vote for all 15. Vote as many as you want.
Yeah. Got some votes coming in.
Yeah, man.
Menti.com. There's if you miss the QR code at the top of the screen, there's a join at menti.com, and then you can use that code 51909929.
Yeah.
5190.
There's the QR code again if you need to use your camera.
And if anyone online is having any trouble, please feel free to raise your hand.
Okay, got it.
Okay, we've got some votes coming in. Looks like we have 4 or 5 votes. Or more than
We've got 7 of 19 people who have joined.
Small clarifier on number 14, are you saying you would can public funding of remote infrastructure development or just allowing permitting of such stuff?
prioritizing public infrastructure projects. And what is
Are you suggesting public funding? of these
funding?
things?
I think that's a good question that we could clarify here. Like, is that
Yeah, it's like, it's a very different
Like, what do
avenue
we
than what
call
we've been doing, right? You
Right.
know, or, yeah.
like, do we want to try to find funding sources within the city to fund infrastructure development if we were to, and this is for specifically for remote area infrastructure,
Right.
not like existing.
Yeah.
Or, continue to rely on more outside sources, or is that something that become like is more on the onus of developers? Like there are several ways we could go about that. So that might be something we want to clarify here. That's a good comment. Maybe we can- Pretty close to having everyone. So Sarah, you can go ahead and start tallying the votes now. I can just verbally say what we have. So it looks like overall, I guess we can go through them one by one. So number 1, protect and restore the environment. Fairly popular. We have about half of voters, a little less than half of voters like that one. Mitigation of natural hazards, not a lot of votes for that one. Balancing economy and environment, about half of folks like that one. Waterfront development has 9, so about over half of our voters. Designating and protecting parklands has about half. Affordable housing and strategic land use, about a quarter of people, 4 votes there. So some of these we might want to talk through, what we like or don't like about them. Economic vitality and downtown focus has quite a few votes, 9 there. Support Juneau as Juneau's role as a regional hub has 5. Economic diversification beyond tourism has a lot of votes, 12 votes there. Fostering neighborhood scale economic centers, only 3 votes. Encouraging infill and redevelopment has 5. Managed rural and remote growth, only 1. Multimodal transportation systems has 7. Remote area infrastructure development, 0, and create and maintain connected trail system. So it looks like the ones that really stuck out to people are waterfront development, economic vitality, and a downtown focus. Economic diversification beyond tourism. Those were the 3 most popular ones. Do folks want to talk about any of the ones that aren't green, that maybe some of the, I don't know if you can see very well, but some of these that had kind of like middle votes? Yeah, we have.
Yeah, I selected number 6, the affordable housing and strategic land use. Mainly just because I thought that the biggest spillover effect, to me at least, in my mind, is that influx of so many seasonal workers takes units off the year-round housing stock for a short season. So I was surprised that not as many people picked that one, but I'm not offended. But, and then I think that's my only comment for now, not seeing the other ones up there. But I was aligned with pretty much the higher choices other than that one.
I think I have something kind of along those lines. I wrote out a different strategy associated with that, and it was coordinating seasonal housing from different industries. So looking at tourism, seasonal workers for tourism, and seasonal folks that come into the legislative session, and trying to see how well those are aligned. And so if the unit is used for both types of seasonal folks, then it would not use most either, right? So
I had heard anecdotally that housing for the legislative session is no longer an issue because there's so much stock available with the influx of summer units.
so maybe
Like there used to be a legislative affairs portal where people coming for session would apply, and I've heard from folks that work in the session that it's no longer a big deal at all because there's so many Airbnb and other units that are vacant those months that they can just get them for session. So no one really, there's not a lot of stress or anxiety about finding housing for some legislative session.
Are how much the different people able to pay influencing that too? Maybe legis are like to pay a little bit higher the price, like do something that would be a higher price for seasonal that might not necessarily be able to pay that same price.
Or the Airbnb owners
Yeah.
give them a different rate because it's offset.
Oh,
I
sorry.
can't hear.
I'm a chronic mumbler. I'll work on that. I was just saying that the price point at which different, like the legislators versus the seasonal tourism workers might be different too, and that might be playing into it. Perhaps legislators pay a higher price compared to seasonal workers.
So one of the things that was in the instructions, but that you all may not have had a chance to really read or absorb yet, that I just want to point out so that we're kind of like focused on the right types of, or, you know, just our focus is on this work that we're trying to get to with the scenario planning is the strategies that we're trying to identify here. You know, there's going to be a lot of strategies in the plan, right? The strategies that we're trying to identify here are going to help us get to different land use scenarios. So they're going to get us to these things where we can actually identify kind of on a map where different ideas for where and how we could grow. So our questions related to tourism and its spillover effects are like, where should growth happen and how should growth happen? So those are kind of the 2 questions we want to answer, or that we want to come up with strategies for. So an example of a where is number 7, the downtown, is that the economic vitality and downtown focus. So that's a where. That's like, we put a lot of focus, like we use our land use regulations to make sure that downtown, you know, has the ability to continue to grow and develop. And we use policies and incentives to get downtown growth, support the ports downtown. That's kind of a where. There's a little bit of a how in there. So I want us to think about that too. Like, are there other wheres that, other places that we might think about in terms of, like where we might want to support growth? Or types of growth, maybe where would we think housing, we might want to see housing, where might we want to see, more commercial? Yeah,
That's why I was surprised more people didn't choose 10. In terms of like one of the big potential spillover or downsides is if there's a significant change in the amount of tourism. And one of the ways that we can deal with that is by reducing our dependence on tourism and diversifying economic sales. But then that also tends to draw locals to those locations and build those things up. So I was surprised that one didn't have more support like that.
but you're saying one of the ways we can, kind of be more resilient to change its fluxes in tourism is to have more commercial areas beyond just downtown that could support local businesses.
Sure, yeah, like I live on North Douglas, and anytime I have to go downtown or go to Fred Meyer's, it is a colossal pain in the ass.
I think I was like the only one that voted for, what was it, number 12. And I guess, I was just thinking at it from the perspective of, I'm sure it's controversial, but, having, remote development, even remote tourism infrastructure that adds to our local tax base, that gives us money to fund these initiatives we want in the locality, because Juneau's a huge borough. I mean, we could have multiple cruise ports that aren't coming into Juneau at all and still tax them and fund all these things that are underfunded. And, I just look at it as if I were in charge of this place, I'd look at let's get the tourists out of Juneau and tax them anyways. And that sounds like a win to me, reduce the impacts, have more money to fund our government. But, I'm obviously the only one in the room, so I recognize
Really don't
that.
use the tax.
Yeah.
To.
Well,
Anything, but that's the whole topic.
well, sales tax, I mean,
Sure.
that's a piece,
Yeah.
You're talking about
Yeah.
the head tax.
Yeah, the head tax. I had a similar point why I chose the multimodal transportation system with more tourism, more congestion on the roads. I've always been surprised that there's no like rail solution that could transfer tourists quickly and efficiently from downtown out of downtown to the glacier, which would then year-round provide good options to get to Fred Meyer, get to downtown and vice versa from the valley. But that's not just that. There's investing in good public transit that works for tourism, but that works year-round for locals as well.
So, more public transit or mass transit that's not like private tour buses. to
Exactly.
support.
Yeah.
I mean, we have so many proposals about the circulator. Been on in front of the CBJ many, many times and never got approved. Circulator is something that you can get picked up and get dropped off at businesses and take you back to your car, so you don't have to worry about, waiting for a transportation or parking and all that other stuff. But that never really happened.
So when I think about, I mean, none of those strategies really stood out to me when I think of what's happened with tourism here. I think that's why I struggled voting, but a couple, I think, along with the circulator, the pedestrian zone, but what that means is land use of a shipping port that is other than AML on the other side of downtown, so that trucks are not driving through downtown. So finding a different shipping port, whether it's North Douglas and the second crossing, but being able for downtown to be a pedestrian zone, I think that would open it. The other thing that I wondering how Europe deals with the huge, I mean, there have been all these complaints about tourism, what that does to a community. And so looking at Helsinki has some real creative strategies. And one of them is that tourists are considered temporary residents and guests and not consumers. Like, it's not just someone to be taxed, but that we sell the values of our community to the people who visit. And I think at some point we just need to rethink what tourism means for us here. And I don't.
But I think it's a big difference there that our tourists mostly stay for 8 hours and they don't spend the night. It's very,
Right.
but yeah, I think.
No, right. I mean, it does. It kind of looks like.
Yeah. And it's like really consumptive visit because it is so short and you must pack it all in and that's
Right.
where all the rush comes.
It's
Right.
not how and why.
Right, so that's kind of like as a strategy, like
I
what does it
that
mean to
idea, though,
rethink
the
of
embed the
tourists
value.
that.
Along those lines, it begins to necessitate an entirely different approach to tourism, where our focus is no longer on the cruise ships, but bringing in other types of tourists through other means. And maybe it's partnering with cruise ships that do longer stays, 2-3 day stays, or we're focusing more on people flying in, or that type of thing. But it's a complete philosophical difference in what tourism is.
But a strategy of what would it be like to make space for guests, which is a very different space than consumers.
What would that look like? Like, what would the location, the where and the how be there?
More Airbnbs, more hotels, a lot more. Like, to get anywhere near the economic benefit we have from our existing tourism economy, like, reimagine what Juneau is. That's what it's gonna take to get the amount of people that spend that money.
Okay, we're gonna have to move on, but I'll take a couple more.
I just have a question. There's lots of good questions and thoughts here, but we have a lot of people working a lot of efforts on the tourism side, including Our Juneau. You have a tourism manager in the city. Are we ever going to bring people in to actually answer some of these questions?
Answer questions.
Well, I mean, it's okay to have an idea, then you realize this is already in process, or this is already being looked at.
Yeah, we're working.
I mean, these are very aspirational thoughts, but some of them are being either vetted now or have already been vetted and.
Yeah, so I'll remind us that the policies we're talking about right now are policies to test land use and growth strategies. There's a larger set of policies that'll happen in the comp plan, which will include things that the folks working on tourism in Juneau and economic development in Juneau will all be, essentially part of. They will be definitely, working on and developing those, and we may be able to talk to them or hear feedback from them. What we're talking about today is land use and development strategy, so I want to make sure we're focusing on that piece.
I was one of the few to do mitigation of natural hazards, and I chose that specifically because natural hazards grind everything to a halt. If your house in the valley floods, you can't go to work to bring the tourists to the glacier on the bus. This year, the glacier was completely closed down. It pushed all of the tourists to Brotherhood Bridge Trail, actually. Yeah, so the Brotherhood Bridge, where you can view, was packed the day of the flood. And, also on the other end, the flood is kind of the big one in all of our minds, but landslides as well. Cove Park, is slowly collapsing in on itself. Perseverance has a landslide almost every single year. So I think it's important to also look critically on where we're sending our tourists as well.
And I would add the same, I also voted for that one. Also from the perspective of this latest flood, despite the fact that it was in some ways better managed than the previous year, got a lot of publicity down south and did shape people's thinking in my own community around when they were coming up to Juneau and why at a particularly peak moment, just given that the timing of when those floods is happening is also our peak tourist time.
So what would be the where, the how of that policy? What would be like, what is the best way to word that policy?
Yeah, I think the where is just, where are we permitting tourism to take place, whether it's guided, you can't really just stop someone from going to hike Perseverance, but where are we permitting guides to go, and how are we planning with tourism companies to manage both employee safety and safety of guests and residents during catastrophes.
Why I didn't vote for number 2 is this includes prohibiting development. And thinking of the HESCO barriers, it is about encouraging engineering. Like it is not just about prohibiting, but it is about investing in engineering so our bridges don't close and we're cut off from the rest of town. And and all the other things. I mean,
I agree, that's very specific statement
Mhm.
about strategy that we're.
Yeah.
Maybe not.
So what I'm hearing is people don't feel totally comfortable with the idea of discouraging development in flood hazard areas.
because that would be the valley.
And all of
Yeah,
downtown.
and all of downtown. So Douglas, we all can move to. The reality is that for much of the valley, that ship has sailed, the development's there. We, the option at this point to mitigate is for those of us who live right there and got flooded. We just need to walk away from our homes and let them become green space. Which is, I mean, it's not on my radar right now, but it's an option.
I kind of read that as like floodways that are undeveloped.
Yeah.
So like that's not the only glacially influenced or rain influenced flood path. Like we have Eagle Glacier and Herbert Glacier and those riverways too. Like I read that as like prohibiting future development in areas that could become a new valley or whatever. But I think that's a fair point. I mean, we don't want to prohibit where there's like already development, but I was envisioning that as like new development.
I think we're back to the engineering thing
Yeah.
because I mean, you go to South Carolina and the houses are on these great big stilts, and then maybe we just gotta go to stilts. I mean, there's helical piers right now. It's,
Yeah, it's doable.
we build on them all the time.
It's a bit of a topic shift, but one thing, I wrote about this a little bit for the revenue for the federal and state like funding piece of things. And I think it can be either under the free balancing economy environment or its own thing, is that we can create a more progressive tax structure to capture revenue from industry that looks like maybe a severance tax as opposed to mining and things like that. Or finding creative ways to use the head tax that are legally allowable, since that's our current issue. With either case, though, you can reduce in some cases, property tax for the average, property owner in Juneau, and actually still potentially end up with more revenue overall to pay for the services the essential services that make Juneau a more affordable, vibrant place to the point that it's made. So. Yeah, the way I phrased that as its own strategy was creating a progressive revenue structure to capture benefit from major industries.
Okay, yeah.
Number 12, because like I'm envisioning like walkable neighborhoods or something, like he was talking about North Douglas. And I just don't think that downtown has to be the answer, hub all, whatever that, you have, Off Bay, and it's kind of developing into its own little community, and, North Douglas and, downtown Douglas. And I just feel like, we could encourage, these little walkable neighborhoods, these little self-contained neighborhoods. And
Maybe that relates, number 10, I think is maybe what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And I don't know if now is the right moment, but there were also some that I didn't rank because I didn't feel that they were appropriate. Going back to, I think, the conversation earlier of like, are we talking about investing and like using public dollars for specific strategy, or are we just talking about allowing it? Like from my own perspective, I think again, and it sounds like there are other folks who feel that way too, like strategy number 7 didn't feel like the most appropriate anymore with kind of where we're going in terms of like more sustainable, more decentralized tourism that is not just focused on downtown. And equally, as much as I love living out the road, remote area infrastructure development of 14 also didn't seem appropriate, where I felt like 12 and 10 did feel like the appropriate alternatives in those pieces. Just wanted to like put out there those questions of like, I didn't rank those pieces because I didn't feel like they were appropriately reflecting where we wanted to head.
Yeah, anything you didn't vote for is kind of I don't think that would work. So I think you did that right.
some of them I read and I'm like, well, it depends on how you read it. I mean, are we going to take this to the absolute? Because if we're going to go absolute on this, that's kind of crazy. But, if you it's gonna be reasonable, then maybe, so some of them I didn't vote for because I went, well, somebody could take this in a bad way. I mean, I'm a developer and, believe me, when you start talking wetlands and limiting, it's like, no. Because everything in Juneau's a wetland, according to those people. If they see skunk cabbage, you're done.
All right, we've got an online comment from Amara.
Hi, can everyone hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, wonderful. I just wanted to also piggyback and snowball on some comments that were made earlier on the North Douglas front. I have been kind of reading up on the development that's happening with the cruise court over there, which seems like it's kind of making a lot of leeway. And I think it would really help. I think Nimi was the one that suggested the hop on, hop off transit for just the town in general. So I think that would also be really handy to kind of focus on that as well.
So supporting public transit that could both support tourism during that season, but also be used for locals year round. Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
Yes.
Okay. And are we talking mostly supporting a line that would go from downtown to the glacier? Is there anywhere to the transit? Is there sort of a transit corridor that we want to think about somewhere? An area that we want to focus on really building out transit more for that purpose that we're talking about?
I would suggest Lemon Creek. Right now, watching people rent their bikes and go from downtown to the glacier is a little bit painful to Lemon Creek. There's no good crossing. I live in Twin Lakes. I work right in Lemon Creek. And the crossing to get from Twin Lakes, just even to the side of the road you should be biking on, and Lemon Creek is really bad. I see a lot of people, there's really heavy traffic on Vanderbilt and people are just not safe. I've also seen people biking on Egan because they don't know clearly where they should with the bikes. So
And also
yeah.
ferry terminal as well, the fact that if we're looking at trying to bring in a different demographic of tourists that's not cruise dependent, there should absolutely be public transportation that reaches the ferry.
In that area, sorry. I was just in the area off Bay, right, university, a lot of students don't have cars necessarily, and, I know, as a student, walkability on campus is good in a lot of ways, it is hard in ways, especially with the science building out that way, right, you're having to cross Egan, and there's a lot of traffic, and, yeah.
I think creating a walk or the idea of a walkway too, just even from the ferry terminal to the Ock Bay area, because that's a really tight shoulder, and I drive that every day, and there are always people, especially in the summer, even if they're just stopping for a little bit and want to stretch their legs or walk a dog. Sometimes it's precarious.
I would also, this is person invest from city, state funding, federal funding, whatever it is, but without putting in stop signs or stoplights on Egan to put either an overhead or harder to do in the wetlands, some sort of a walkway or a long ramp to get over, an accessible ramp to get across without going a mile or two to be able to get to it underpass. There's a lot of accidents, as we all know, crossing Egan at Fredmeyer.
Yeah.
Do you mean pedestrian or cars?
Both.
I was gonna say, because right now watching pedestrians try to do that is
It's nice.
Yeah, you see more and more these days.
Yeah.
Well, as the development closer to the airport happens.
Yeah.
All right, so let's move on to critical uncertainty number 2, which is climate change and environmental hazards. So we're gonna go ahead and vote for anything you feel like is a clear strategy that could help Juneau successfully succeed in responding to the impacts of climate change and environmental hazards. Anything you feel like you maybe wouldn't support or not sure enough to vote for, just don't vote for it. Just things that you feel like are clear winners, and we can talk through all. Don't worry too much about the voting. That's not it's just to get the conversation started. Don't stress out too much, everybody. We're just gonna take a couple more minutes, or a couple more seconds really to let people finish voting. Is there anyone, while Sarah's kind of tallying up the results here? I'm seeing some fairly clear standouts, which are mitigation of natural hazards, not surprisingly. Protect and restore the environment, that also makes sense. Balancing the economy and the environment. Designating and protecting parklands and encouraging infill and redevelopment as well as multimodal transportation system. Anyone want to comment on any of the strategies they voted for, or maybe some that you are kind of on the fence about, maybe have questions about whether you think it would be appropriate or not?
I have a hand raised.
Travis, go ahead.
Hi, hopefully you can hear me.
Yeah.
Yes, I just wanted to, I guess, before getting into the conversation, get clarification on what the definition for mitigate natural hazards is. I think a lot of the natural hazards we deal with in the borough, you just could not mitigate. You could definitely reduce the risk through others, strategies, but you couldn't just say like, hey, we're going to go take care of Suicide Basin and make it so it's not a hazard anymore.
Yeah, let's do that. Why don't we do that? That's like, why don't we put that one on here? Yeah, no, I think managing risk is a good way to maybe reword that mitigate. Thank you for clarifying. Sorry to do that, but we're not engineering.
Yeah. I think one of the challenges that I'm having with the voting is that the title of the strategy or the name of the strategy might make sense for the thing, but then the description of the strategy does not.
Okay, well, then let's talk about how we can maybe make, like, what works about the name for you that we
So
like.
for example, like number 6, affordable housing and strategic land use. Strategic land use seems like it is absolutely geared towards dealing with climate issues and environmental issues. But what the strategy is about designating urban areas along corridors, and it's more about housing and such. Not as directly geared towards climate issues. Now, if it included not just housing affordable to all economic groups, which I'm in favor of, but environmentally sustainable housing that is affordable to all groups, then it begins to have more of a direct relation to this.
I think what this strategy, one of the things that this strategy is getting at that could have an impact on managing risk of our of environmental hazards is we're talking about growing within the existing urban service area, which is basically, the kind of growth boundary of the city, rather than maybe expanding into areas that don't have infrastructure built out already or are not within kind of the developed area. And so that could mean potentially like avoiding areas, like we were talking about, avoiding areas that are not currently developed, but might be in flood risk zones, for example. But it's also about like making good use of the infrastructure we already have. So doing things like, what we call, infill maybe where, we're, having,
Right, I hear you, but, several of the things that you said would be good and related to this are specific in other things. Which is why I didn't choose that. Infill is one of the specific ones. I forget the other, right? It's like the things that could be related to this are secondary off of it.
Gotcha, yeah. Okay, but I'm hearing like land use could be really impactful.
I think so.
Yeah. What do we think about like what land use might look like? We talked a little bit about like the valley and all the environmental hazards that are in the valley. And we're saying we definitely don't want to limit, it sounds like overall, like don't want to limit or have any kind of like moratorium on building in or new development in existing areas where there's risk. What else do we think about what development and growth might look like in the face of some of the natural hazards we're facing, landslides, floods, et cetera?
Could that be increasing zoning, going from D1 to D3 to D5, or allowing accessory dwelling units?
So like
Larger dwelling
increasing
units.
density
Yeah.
or so that's a how. What about like the where, like increasing density and maybe allowing for more, infill, like ADUs are kind of a form of infill, right? They're a way of building in places where there's already development that's happened.
In areas with fewer hazards, is that what you're kind of talking about there, right?
Would be, yeah. So increasing density and infill in areas with fewer hazards.
And existing infrastructure.
Got it. Yeah, I like that.
I guess one of the things that comes to mind is existing infrastructure, though, if we're looking at changing climate and you have, more heavy rain events and things like that, some of the existing infrastructure may not be adequate size and a lot think about storm drains and stormwater in particular. So
I could hardly hear.
I said, when we're thinking about existing infrastructure, that we're looking at this in the lens of, adapting to climate change and changing weather patterns, things like stormwater infrastructure that's already existing, may now be undersized for the types of, weather events that we get. So I think it's a little bit tricky there, thinking about the infrastructure side of things and looking at the different types of, weather-related events that come.
The capacity and the adequacy of existing infrastructure to
And the
accommodate
hazard
to growth.
There's a lot of rain on snow that happens, so.
And the design, not just capacity, but the design, the original, storm drain exit was into the river. And what happened in the last 3 years is once the river level rose above that outflow, it started coming back up and flooding the street. So the design itself needs to be modified.
See that as kind of a combination of 2 and 11, the mitigating of natural hazard and encouraging infill and redevelopment. So developing redeveloping maybe is the way of phrasing it so that we're mitigating for natural hazards. I think that's kind of what you're getting at the summary. Yeah.
So we're saying maybe growing in places where we already have, growing in places where we don't have a lot of hazards, and trying to do infill where there are places that already have existing infrastructure, but also rehabbing or improving the existing infrastructure to make sure that it is actually adequate for the types of natural hazards that we're experiencing.
And I think that leaves space for like that balancing the economy and the environment so that we're also leaving spaces that are intact, that are important for our salmon rearing streams, et cetera, and like leaving space for that as well. It's a kind of part of our culture as a community. And also like that redundancy in having salmon bearing streams helps mitigate against salmon collapses, which is an important part of our economy, And so it's not just the land use development that's like direct to like where and how people are living, but also like what redundancies does that allow so that we have like a diverse environmental portfolio as well as a diverse like land use portfolio, or like not land use, but building, yeah, development.
We have someone online.
Yeah, Travis,
Sorry.
do you have another comment? I know you had raised your hand earlier, so.
Well, I think the conversation kind of came full circle to what I was going to mention, but the concept of, infilling existing development within areas of known hazards, that's just kind of counterintuitive to reducing risk, right? You wouldn't want to increase population density or housing within a known hazard. So, maybe there is some opportunity to develop zoning and code requirements that would, put certain limitations on what's built there or control how those structures are built so that they could resist whatever the hazard is, like if it's flooding or if it's a landslide or if it's, some earthquake effect, something like that. But that's just, I guess, a general comment on the infilling in the existing development. And then, if we stop allowing infilling existing development, the only other thing we can start doing as a borough is focusing on, okay, where can we develop? And so I think moving into those other strategies of like 14, it's kind of going beyond where we are now and our known hazards and making sure that we're looking forward to the areas that we can develop in these lower risk hazard zones. But sorry, I think the conversation kind of got there.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I was capturing that last comment. So on number 14, so we're talking about infill and like developing in places that are already developed and making sure that that infrastructure can support that. But then also potentially looking at places that aren't developed, but the few places in Juneau, there aren't a lot, but that don't have some kind of natural hazard that they're prone to, as like we should look at that as well, is what you're saying.
Right. Yeah. Certainly, if you're going to prevent more development in existing areas, you're going to have to open up new areas. And when we do that, we definitely just have to be aware of what the risks are.
This feels like where we would have the conversation about the landfill having a life of 10 years and the wastewater treatment plant being under incredible pressure. So figuring out how we use land to move to a zero waste, or I keep thinking like we spend $5 million to send our processed poop. I don't know if we still do that out. And is there a way to use that to turn that into an energy source? But thinking, how do we move towards taking the resources that are here? We've been talking about doing a construction resale shop, because right now trying to get rid of construction items is nearly impossible. And as Medicaid moves to work requirements, figuring out how we have employment opportunities for people. I mean, there's just so many things that are wound in this together, but that feels like a huge environmental hazard that we're facing.
Yeah.
Besides that, electric cars, like AML not being willing to bring up, is it AML?
Yeah.
Not being willing to bring up electric cars. So part of that, what does that mean?
Well,
So, but for land use, or thinking of the zero waste campus that they're working on right now, and also if there are ways that we can resell the stuff that we have.
Going back to kind of the conversation earlier about wetlands and mitigating and where we build, how to build. I didn't vote for 13 and 15, but now hearing the conversation, like those are really key. They also tie in with 1 and 5 parkland and protecting and restoring, wetlands, because I think, I've walked a lot and spent a lot of time on dredge lakes before and after this year's flood and last year's flood, as well as the Brothers Ridge trails. And these are areas that, you look at the mitigation maps, were affected by glacial lake flooding, and that has absorbed some of that impact. The HESCO barrier is pushing more water over to that side. I think that we can still have productive uses for communities, and in fact, as we have more input, accessible trail systems to serve folks and have accessible recreation And so I just think about, you know, how do we really support those sorts of trail systems, those that are especially kind of connected to residential areas.
Yeah.
And connected to wetlands that protect wetlands, right? Because you then have that force preserving wetland when people use trails in the area a lot of the time. You know, that is a thing that encourages, you know, the long-term preservation of a place, and again, a productive use for that place, that is good towards anything. We're not building.
Yeah, so maybe using some of the places that are in natural hazard zones for other uses other than development, but still uses that can be beneficial to the community, can bring in tourism, can provide recreation, healthy ways to get outside and that. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna move us along. We only have about 10 minutes left. We have one other critical uncertainty. And so let's do our voting and let's not worry too much about it, but just as a little temperature check here, we're gonna vote. So this one is state and federal funding and policy decisions, which we cannot always control, right? So which of the 15 strategies here do you think would help Juneau respond successfully to the impacts of either a lack of federal and state funding or policy decisions that might impact you know, us, and that could relate to things like roads, bridges, other infrastructure, transportation services like the ferry system, emergency management. What are some strategies for handling the uncertainty of state funding and policy decisions? I just turned it off.
This one is like so wildly broad. I feel like we can do the whole thing on just scenarios of this.
Right.
You know, do we have mass military buildup? Do we lose all our support from the state government? You know,
Yeah.
something in between. I mean,
Yeah.
totally transformative one way or the other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's a big uncertainty, right? It can have a huge impact. So it's kind of like, how can we locally strengthen ourselves so that if something wild like that happens, we can still, like, you know, be as kind of self-sufficient as possible while also not being totally self-sufficient, right? Like, there's only so much money and support that comes, that can be found locally, but what can we do that can help us be a little more durable or resilient to those kinds of changes?
Well, and the opposite is true too, like how can we use the money that does come in?
Right.
Yeah,
Right, that's a great point. Yeah.
we're supposed to be thinking that things could go either.
Right, yeah, like in a good, in a situation where we're flush with cash, like, yeah, what do we do? So, I'm seeing the votes are almost all in, so, I think the most popular one right now is economic diversification beyond tourism. Also supporting Juneau's role as a regional hub. And balancing the economy and environment, as well as affordable housing and strategic land use. Any comments from folks who voted on those for why we like those? Anyone disagree with those or feel like those are not strategies that would work well?
I guess I'm balancing in the economy and the environment. I guess it's nice because it can be a buffer either way. If we're all starving, we can burn down, you know, we can cut all the trees down, mine all the gold, whatever. But if we're flush with cash, we can preserve all our natural beauty and take the, you know, we're environmentalist kind of road. And, you know, I mean, we have a lot of resources around us. We'd love to preserve them, but economic necessity, you know, you can look to places with less economic abundance and see what happens to the environment oftentimes.
Well, it's okay.
I think I offered with the first item too, as it relates to balancing economy and environment, this idea of balancing local revenue with industry profit too, right? Like industries that are attracted to some degree, like tourism and mining, right? This question of how do we create a more sort of progressive tax structure for our community, rely less on the federal government and the state, but also local residents, for, the money that we spend on essential services. That's the thing that we've seen with the state in particular, right? Like schools, for example, we spend more on schools because the state has been spending less on schools, right? We need to balance that out. And so having that flexibility when it comes to revenue is, I think, really. And I see that in three out of all the strategies, and that's why I think it's environment, economy, like local services, almost sort of the balance.
What is the where of supporting, as sustainably as possible, supporting the resource extraction industry a little more, maybe supporting mining or supporting,
Downtown, AJ Mine,
say what?
AJ Mine. I mean, it's in a developed area. It's already the most environmentally disturbed part of the city. If we were to, why mine in the pristine wilderness when you can mine in a place where we've already basically paved over the natural environment and covered the waterfront with mine tables.
Well, isn't there a plan to have a new dock out the road?
Cascade Point.
Yeah.
So that's like probably the most likely new mine to be, so you're talking about new mining. I think is what we could see on that axis.
By Herbert.
Nice thing about AJ is the city owns a lot of the revenue, so it could actually become public money instead of going to some multinational.
And yeah, the point, like a severance tax is the sort of revenue side of that. That's a land use tax, for the international. And it's something that is
I wanted to add a point to the create and maintain a connected trail system. So, we all know that's one of the reasons why residents love living here, same with tourism. State Parks has been slashed incredibly in their budget. The Forest Service has been slashed incredibly. So it's incredibly relevant for the CBJ to focus on their trails and improving them. And then one point that also this hazard mitigation card misses is that it's also a very sustainable employment in Juneau. Drill mix where I work, we employ about 25 crew members. If we have more money, we take more. And it's we were able to pick up Forest Service workers who lost their jobs this season. So it's really relevant to this federal and state first conversation.
And I'd also maybe throw into that conversation, I voted for 1 and 2 that I see wasn't as popular, but I felt similarly, those are areas that we're likely to see that we're already seeing pretty large federal cuts in, but we have pretty substantial impacts on in terms of like a local level and kind of what it means for both our economy, livelihoods, and kind of living here. And so investing energy in those 2 places and revenues in those areas locally seems quite relevant.
I'm not sure which one this would go under, but just hearing about trail systems made me think about more cabins as far as land use, more city-owned cabins, because the ones that I know of are Malga and the Eagle Crest cabin, and they're booked out like 6 months in advance. The second they go online, they're incredibly popular with people that live here and that are visiting. And I think there's plans to build another one out by Malga. But I think like we could probably build like 10 more, or like a trail, like a hut system like Europe. Like I think that's a huge opportunity.
So
to do, like, more
using some
diversified.
like kind of strategic land use and investment in recreational area to help support the economy.
Yeah, and specifically with like
City-owned.
Cabins.
More not just the economy, but like a retention of people. I mean, it's like a huge attribute. It's like one of the most fun things to do around here.
The cabin.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a highlight of my summer every year, Yeah.
It kind of circles back to critical number 1 that we talked about. A hut-to-hut system has been talked about a lot because it encourages more independent tourism, and independent tourism, I can't remember the exact dollar amount, but they spend a significant more amount of dollars per day. Yeah. And per capita.
Yeah, and it goes back to that conversation about diversifying the types of tourism too. So it's not necessarily just about tourists that, come on a ship, take a bus out to the glacier and leave. It's maybe a different type of engaging with tourism. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, what if anything else, the how or where of how we might respond to state and federal funding and policy decision changes?
Infrastructure.
Yeah, what about infrastructure, roads, bridges, ferries?
I was gonna say, I think 13 and 10 to me also seems really relevant in this way, and then connected back to kind of our larger strategies around like building Juneau culture and identity. Like we know that in times of economic and political turmoil, that like local communities and local community identity and feeling connected is super important in being resilient more widely. And so I think having more connection outside of through individual car ownership, which is a class dynamic in and of itself, and creating more decentralized city infrastructure and kind of centers would help enable that.
That's important, like the infrastructure, like it goes, if funding goes away, if money dries up, being stretched out, infrastructure all over the place is bad. We can't afford to maintain it. And on the flip side, if the federal government shoves like 3 icebreakers down our throat over the next decade, I mean, I'm not saying it's likely, but there's bluster about this kind of thing. And that you get that many crew people here, we probably do need to spread out a bit, but it's like, it's hard to have a policy because this is binary. It's like, I bet you, we would have a very hard time maintaining our infrastructure without, like if we had to maintain Egan Drive and all the state highways that we have here, we really have a hard time doing it on our own economic resources,
I mean, I think that goes back to what you're talking about, is changing some of the like, I call it like severance.
Yeah, like severance, like just increasing the progressivity, as a weird way of saying that, of our revenue structure, right? Ensuring that we're capturing revenue. That is equal to that. Yeah. Like a severance tax or something that tax. Is legally allowable to have our own, to be able to stay on our own. Basically, as it comes to these things. Because again, what we've seen with the state and what we'll see with the feds is a shifting of responsibility down to local governments, right? Without the funding that comes with it.
So maybe another strategy is like lobbying or legal resources to, be able to actually get someplace on being able to capture more of this head tax money for broader purposes. Because I think that's one place, it not really, it's like we need to go assert ourselves legally and, get more rights for the city of Juneau.
Not a land use strategy, but
No,
I
but
like
I've
it.
got, it's like,
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad this is all bubbling up. We don't need to be too like, I do have one question on land use though, and we're at time, so I'm gonna acknowledge that anyone easily feel free. But I just, one other question that I'm curious about with the where is, if we did have more kind of neighborhood scale economic centers, somebody brought up like, it's really important to have more places to gather other than just downtown, kind of central. What are like, where do we think those places could be? Like we were at Mendenhall Mall the other day and we're thinking like, this could be a really cool kind of little like downtown kind of center almost for the valley. If it was maybe built a little differently, designed a little differently. Are there places like that you all think that like, this would be a great little downtown for Lemon Creek or, yeah.
I think Ock Bay is like right on the border.
Yeah.
Right.
Condos.
Yeah, there's a few things about it that need
Yeah.
to be tweaked, but like it is really close to being like a new hub.
I think that is really important to circling back way earlier when we were talking about retaining younger populations, because as someone who went to UAS, you don't have a car, like Ock Bay is your world. It is hard to get downtown. I see a lot of people leave Juneau after they graduate because they don't really know Juneau, living out here in this weird little bubble.
Yeah, and so maybe also like having a better transit connection would help connect it to the rest, but then also that stronger transit connection, if it were more of a hub, could connect it between downtown and other places too.
That area around Safeway with the medical stuff and the senior living, I mean, that's kind of becoming its own little thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think your point about if the Minute Mall area was designed a little bit differently, it would be like a lot more walkable and feel a lot more like a community. And
I agree
so-
with the Vintage Park area as well.
Yeah.
The food truck court there has really made it
Like
quite
around
walkable,
Safeway.
honestly. Yeah.
I mean, connecting those two areas too.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, yeah.
Nugget Mall too, huge piece of land and hardly.
Yeah, just something that-
Redevelopment, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, so.
Great view of Douglas Mountains too.
I'm not sure where in Lemon Creek, maybe by Breeze In makes the most sense. Or like Western Auto Zone. There's- Yeah, like a lot of spaces open in that Western Auto Zone. There's just Jerry's really in Western Auto.
Maybe the dump in 10 years.
Oh,
Yeah, you can picture a little more density and activity there, you know, I mean, AutoZone, maybe not the most exciting place, but you got a little, maybe like mixed use, like 2-story retail and.
Yeah, little restaurant.
Yeah.
Douglas, downtown Douglas.
It already is. It's-
Right.
Well, I was part of the steering committee for downtown Douglas, and there was a lot of discussion about this type of thing, and what Douglas would want specifically related to all of this, but it's definitely in the mix.
And.
Yeah.
And what did they say?
Oh, there's, what, a 16-page?
Yeah,
thing that came
I'm
out?
familiar. Chris, yeah.
Walkable, maintain the character,
But like,
but
Yeah.
more geared towards local rather than bringing tourists over.
Right. serving the neighborhood versus being like, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that idea of serving the neighborhood too for Ock Bay, like so much of it is like the tourism and people going out on well water for like part of the year, which makes it harder to like recreate in that area as like someone who lives in Ock Bay. Like I stopped kayaking because the amount of wake that comes through with like the whale watching boats to and from, it's like, it doesn't feel fun.
Yeah.
But like thinking about how it can be like, I don't know, like so much of the harbor is like not tilted towards commercial fisheries, and it's like all whale watching. And sometimes I feel like that doesn't feel like a year-round use. And I think what I would hope is like more consistent year-round uses that like caters to year-round use.
Reminded me of something that we talked about at that other committee as well. What we're talking about, the smaller neighborhood economic centers, also ties into natural disaster mitigation, because it creates areas of resiliency that may be cut out. So for example, something happens in the bridge, goes down, and now Douglas residents can't get across easily. It creates, or the flood changes and cuts off the valley or something. Having those areas make them more resilient to natural disasters.
Right.
I'm just gonna throw, I'm sure you do this all over the country, right? So, I mean, it's pretty, where can these feasibly exist? It's a combination of traffic patterns and, nearby amenities and, who's gonna use this stuff. And I think we've seen some traffic data from DOT on the main thoroughfares. And I think if you go look at vacant parcels of land, it's kind of clear, at least from my perspective as a developer, which places make sense for this and which don't. And, it's kind of hard to write this into existence without the fundamental economic drivers standing behind it.
Yeah, and that's part of the modeling.
Yeah,
Looking
okay.
at vacancy, looking
Yeah.
at, like basically redevelopment potential, so looking at improvement value of different parcels. So there's a lot of economics that go into how we think about this, but there's a level of like also just sketching out what's possible without thinking too much about market realities, but then also like ultimately,
Yeah.
that has to be something we're considering. All right. We're over time, folks. Thank you for staying. I wanted to keep this a little longer just because it was a great conversation, so appreciate that. I wanted to say that CBJ has offered to do a follow-up meeting if folks feel like they have more to discuss, because this was a lot, we know, and it's hard to, and you didn't get the instructions. Apologies for that. Technology, not always our friend. So CBJ offered that if folks are interested. I don't know, maybe we can discuss that in a follow-up email. Minta, I don't know how you want to do that, but if there is appetite for that, CBJ has space to make that time.
Yeah, so we have, thanks, Tashi. I have the Douglas Library enrolled for Wednesday, September 10th, from 5 to 7. If we want to follow up with this and have more conversation, we want to make sure everyone has enough chance with time with each other to really work this stuff out, because it's a lot. It wouldn't be a requirement, but we're happy to show up, and it would be new for us in Scott, and we're not as good as Sanji and Lydia, but we'll do our best.
Probably have to be with us. Like, oh, the consultants are gonna be there, great, we'll show up. Yeah, so that is on the table. That was September the 10th, is that right? Just for the Wednesday the 10th.
Yeah. That's just a date that I could find something that was available.
Okay.
At Douglas Library from 5 to
At the
7.
Douglas Library. Yeah.
So maybe we can send a follow-up email. Yeah.
But, I can follow up.
Yeah,
Just want to do it off of that. It's just so much. And I somehow failed to get all of this to the time. Like I had to. I don't know what happened.
Well, thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time. Nice to see you all, and we will be back doing more scenario plan work in a couple months. A little bit more.